There are invitations that aren't meant to celebrate, but to remind you that you don't belong. I received the wedding invitation from my sister on a bitterly cold winter morning, just as November rolled into Boston. The cover glittered like a cruel joke. Elegant white with gold lettering, printed on thick cardstock sharp enough to cut skin. I thought it was a bank notice or a tuition bill for my son. I didn't expect this. Just a few lines of capitalized formality, but I read them over and over again, as if decoding some hidden threat. My name and my son's, Aiden, were written in full, respectfully, as if we hadn't been treated like outsiders by our own family. And the sender? Charlotte Blake. The sister I stopped calling my sister years ago. I placed the wedding invite on the kitchen counter, next to the unpaid electric bill. The heater sputtered and clicked from age, and the faint scent of cold coffee lingered in our one-bedroom apartment. Aiden was sitting on the floor, carefully folding a paper airplane model. A freebie I picked up from a local community fair. He looked up when I sighed. "What's wrong, Mom?" I hesitated, then handed him the invitation. He read slowly, eyes widening like he'd just discovered something magical. "Aunt Charlotte's getting married? Are we going? I've never been to a wedding." I smiled faintly, though my heart tightened in my chest. Charlotte, or rather, Miss Charlotte Blake, was always the star. Beautiful, socially gifted, and especially adored by our mother Loretta. Since our father Henry passed from a stroke 4 years ago, I'd been quietly erased from every family photo. My presence seemed to exist only as a shadow, one my mother no longer acknowledged. Dad had always been the only one in my corner. When I had Aiden at 27 with a man the family deemed beneath us, he didn't get angry, he just said gently, "You're a good mom. That's enough." But after he died, everything crumbled. My mother said I was a disgrace. Charlotte called my son the result of a foolish mistake. The calls stopped. The handshakes at family events turned into cold nods. I never told Aiden the truth. He still believed Aunt Charlotte was amazing and that Grandma was just really busy. I couldn't bring myself to take away those innocent dreams. I looked at Aiden for a long moment, just 8 years old, yet already familiar with waiting for me to finish late shifts, skipping toys so I could buy milk. He'd never worn a suit, never stepped inside a 5-star hotel, never lived a day without watching me stretch tips from my barista job on Tremont Street. And now, his eyes lit up just from holding an invitation. From someone who once called his mother an embarrassment. I knew I couldn't say no. That night, after Aiden fell asleep, I sat alone on our creaky wooden balcony chair. The chill seeped through my sweater, but I didn't go inside. I flipped through an old photo album, back when the three of us smiled freely. Charlotte was just a short-haired little girl, always clinging to Dad, and there had been a family once. There had been love. There had been a place to come home to. Now, there was just me. A single mother. And a child. Who didn't know he was born. From courage, not regret. The next morning, I called Charlotte. "Hi, it's Harper. I got the invitation, thank you. We'll be there." There was a flicker of surprise in her voice, but she stayed perfectly poised like someone newly engaged to a handsome CEO. "Oh, you'll come, great. Mom will be thrilled." "Oh, Harper. The wedding's quite formal, everyone's dressing appropriately. I hope you and Aiden will blend in." I gripped the phone. My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed calm. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you." I hung up and looked out the window. Snow had started falling softly. Just like everything in my life. Cold, unexpected, and without warning. I would go. Not for Charlotte. Not for my mother, but for Aiden. And for Dad. For once, just once, I wanted my son to see his mother walk into a room she was told she didn't deserve to enter. The taxi stopped in front of the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Once a place I only passed by, looking up from the sidewalk. Today I wasn't the barista smelling of espresso. I was a mother, walking her son into a world of chandeliers and fresh orchids. Aiden clutched my hand. He wore a light gray suit and a blue striped tie. I had trimmed his hair the night before, trying to make him look as neat and presentable as I could. As for me, a navy blue dress rented from a thrift store and clearance sale heels. I might not shine, but no one could say I didn't look appropriate. Inside, the setting felt like a movie. Vaulted ceilings, sparkling crystal chandeliers, white orchids cascading from pillars, and soft classical music. But the glances from real people cut sharper than glass. "Mom? I'm kinda scared," Aiden whispered. I knelt to fix his collar. "You don't have to be like them, Aiden. Just be yourself. And remember, we have every right to be here." We stepped into the main hall. A staff member led us past rows of white rose centerpieces and scented candles. He glanced at the seating chart, then pointed toward the emergency exit. "Table 23, far right, extended family section." I nodded, thanked him, and took Aiden's hand again. Our table sat beside a stone pillar, next to the HVAC unit, nearly hidden behind a 6-foot screen. Other tables had velvet linens and satin bows on the chairs. Ours? Simple fabric-covered plastic chairs. No flowers. No name cards. Aiden looked around. "Mom, why is our table different?" I squeezed his hand gently. "They just made a mistake. But it's okay, we're here to enjoy ourselves." I was about to pour us water when a sharp voice rang out. "Harper? Wow, you actually came." Charlotte, or the bride of the year, approached with a frozen smile. Her mermaid-cut gown sparkled with crystals under every light. Each step seemed to remind me I didn't belong. "Aiden, you've grown so much, you look, well, behaved." Her voice sounded like she was bestowing a favor. Then she turned to me, tilting her head slightly. "Sorry about the table, it's a bit out of the way. Richard's guests took up most of the front section. You understand, right?" I didn't respond. Just offered a polite smile, barely enough to avoid being rude. Just then, my mother Loretta turned from the head table. She wore a deep purple satin gown, hair in an elegant updo, pearls covering her neck. She looked at me with undisguised discomfort. "Harper, you came. Hope it's not inconvenient." It wasn't a greeting. I felt Aiden's grip tighten around my fingers. I leaned down. His mother is never an inconvenience, but if anyone feels bothered, they're free to look the other way. Charlotte let out a soft laugh, then drifted away like a breeze laced with Chanel perfume. Loretta muttered under her breath, "She always has to act so noble." The reception began. Expensive dishes were served: seared foie gras, truffle mushroom soup, smoked salmon with dill sauce. Our table wasn't served until I asked for the third time. Aiden was hungry. I asked for more bread, and the waiter looked at me like I was asking for scraps. "Did they forget about us, Mom?" Aiden asked, eyes glistening. "No, sweetie, they're just not used to kindness, so they tend to let it slip through." I wiped his mouth, my heart burning but my voice still soft. I could feel the stares like needles in my back. Judgmental eyes, hushed giggles, and whispers I didn't need to hear to know they were about us. Then came the bride's family introductions. The host called out my mother's name, followed by Charlotte's family. Close relatives were invited on stage to toast the couple. My name wasn't mentioned, neither was Aiden's. I thought I shouldn't be surprised. Then something happened that made me freeze. Charlotte took the mic on stage, her eyes drifting toward our table. "Today is a special day, and I'd like to share this joy with a very special guest. Please everyone, turn your attention to table 23. The whole ballroom turned, a spotlight beamed directly onto Aiden and me. I recognized that look, the way Charlotte stared at me, like I was her final move in a perfectly orchestrated performance. I knew the humiliation wasn't over. But I didn't move. I wanted to see just how far she'd go. I held Aiden's hand tight as the blinding light locked onto our table like we were a cheap party trick being revealed. The murmurs died down, replaced by Charlotte's sweet, and dangerously poised voice from the stage. Thank you all for being here with us today, but I have a special gift I'd like to present to everyone. A chill ran down my spine. The spotlight clung to me and my son like invisible chains, dragging us into the judgmental center of the room. Charlotte stepped off the stage, microphone still in hand. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor like a fashion show rehearsal. She stopped in the middle of the ballroom, facing the crowd. Let me introduce my sister Harper, the brave single mom, and my adorable nephew, Aiden. They are very special guests tonight. A few stifled laughs came from her wealthy social circle. People who had once politely shook my hand at someone else's wedding now stared at me with a blend of pity and amusement. Charlotte raised the mic again, her tone suddenly shifting into that of a seasoned auctioneer at Sotheby's. And now, with all the love and generous spirit in this room, I'd like to kick off a little charity auction. One brave single mom and her sweet little boy, as a combo package. Do I have any opening bids? Laughter exploded, applause rang through the ballroom like thunder. Aiden flinched, his small hand tightening around my finger. Mom, what are they saying? I bit down hard, tasting blood in my mouth just to stay composed. Charlotte was still smiling, her version of a clever social joke. Of course I'm just kidding, but if anyone does want to help my sister and her kid live a little better, well, why not? I stood up abruptly, but before I could say a word, a voice I prayed I'd never hear again cut through the noise. Loretta, my mother, grabbed the mic. If that girl is the item on auction, she said, then I think the bidding should start at $0, because frankly, I've never seen her as worth anything. The room burst into savage laughter as if someone had flipped a switch. Some clapped, others pulled out their phones. A few faces looked uneasy, but no one spoke. No one stopped it. Everything went silent in my ears. Aiden was crying. Quietly, his face flushed red from shame. I bent down and held him tightly, my heart trembling with rage and humiliation. I was wrong to come, wrong to think an invitation could patch a decayed relationship. Wrong to hope my son would find something beautiful here. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay upright. We're leaving, Aiden. But Mom, we are not something to be auctioned off. I took his hand and turned away from the spotlight, from the crowd laughing at our pain. But just as I did, a deep, steady voice rang out from the far end of the ballroom. $1 million. I froze. The room fell completely silent, like all the air had been sucked out. I turned around. Everyone followed my gaze. Standing there in a charcoal gray suit, navy tie, tall and dignified, was a man with salt and pepper hair. The spotlight caught the sharp lines of his face and the cold fire in his eyes. I'm bidding $1 million to buy Harper and her son. And if necessary, I'll pay extra to shut the mouths of every person who just laughed at them. Charlotte's mouth fell open. My mother stood frozen, her hand trembling around the mic. I knew him. He wasn't a stranger. He was Daniel Rowe, once my father's personal attorney. A name I'd only seen in old legal letters. Daniel calmly walked toward the stage. No one stopped him. Maybe because no one knew how. No one had ever seen an auction turn upside down like this. He looked at me, his gaze softening. Harper, I'm here to finish what Henry, your father, never got the chance to do. Charlotte forced a laugh. You're joking, right? This is a wedding, not a courtroom. Daniel turned to her, his eyes sharp as a blade. You better pray this doesn't turn into a courtroom. Because if I reveal everything I know, this won't end with a wedding. I hadn't even had the chance to pull Aiden out of the ballroom when the name Daniel Rowe hit me like a bolt from the past. Every cell in my body froze. Daniel. He was the man my father used to mention during the rare quiet nights we shared tea together. A quiet lawyer, but absolutely trustworthy. He walked directly to the stage, moving slowly as if the tension in the air had no effect on him. When he reached the microphone, he scanned the entire room, before his eyes settled on me. I'm sorry, Harper. I wish I could have met you under better circumstances, but today, I have to speak the truth. Because it was Henry Blake's wish that it be done on this exact day. Charlotte clenched the fabric of her wedding dress, her face pale. Loretta stood behind her, wavering like she was about to faint. Daniel pulled a thick sealed envelope from his suit jacket. This is the final, legally binding will of Mr. Henry Blake, signed and notarized on June 2, 3 years ago. He didn't leave everything to Loretta or Charlotte like everyone assumed. Instead, he paused, drew out a legal document, held it up under the spotlight and looked directly at my mother and sister. He left 90% of his estate and the full ownership of Blake Properties to Harper and Aidan. The air seemed to be sucked from the room. A murmur rose and was instantly silenced. I thought I'd misheard. Charlotte stormed forward, her voice sharp and shrill. What? No! That's fake! My father had a will from 4 years ago. His personal attorney witnessed it. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, but that was before he learned about the scheme you and your mother orchestrated. When he discovered the funds quietly funneled from the company accounts into a private trust called Blake Legacy Future under your name, he quietly rewrote all his legal documents. With signatures, video footage and witnesses. He turned to the room. And one of those witnesses is sitting here today. Judge Harold Bennett. Present today as an honorary guest. All heads turned toward a distinguished older man seated near the back. He gave a small, solemn nod, but it held the weight of a gavel in a courtroom. Charlotte stumbled back like she'd been shoved against a wall. Loretta erupted. You have no right to humiliate us like this. This is a wedding, not a courthouse. Daniel remained composed. I'm not humiliating anyone, Mrs. Loretta. You publicly insulted your daughter and grandson in front of 300 guests. I'm simply fulfilling Mr. Henry's final instruction, exposing the truth and ensuring his assets go to their rightful heirs. I stepped forward, my heart thudding like a drum. Aidan clutched my hand tightly, asking nothing, but his eyes were filled with questions. Mr. Daniel, I trembled. My father. He really remembered us? Daniel smiled, a soft, warm smile. Not only did he remember you, he worried about you every single day. Even when you stayed silent, never asked for anything, he prepared everything. He once told me, Harper is strong, but I don't want her to carry it all alone. I broke down in tears. Not for the inheritance, not for the money, but because, for years, I thought I'd been forgotten. Turns out, the only person who truly listened to me had been thinking of me until his last breath. Daniel turned back to the stage. As of today, legally, Harper will assume leadership of the company. All of Mr. Henry's assets, his homes, stocks, bank accounts, including over $18 million, will be transferred to her name. Charlotte nearly screamed. No, no way, this can't be happening. Daniel didn't even turn around. His voice was ice. You're free to file a lawsuit, but I suggest you find a good attorney, because the evidence of your embezzlement was submitted to the federal tax office this morning. Loretta staggered, gripping the back of a chair. I looked at her, this woman who once called herself my mother, now ghostly pale. Charlotte stood frozen in the spotlight, eyes blank, her wedding gown like a net binding her to her ridiculous performance. I bent down to Aidan. Mom, does that mean Grandpa always loved me? I choked back a sob. Yes, sweetheart, and he proved it in the best way he knew how. Daniel stepped down from the stage and handed me one final envelope. This is a letter from Mr. Henry. He asked me to give it to you, today. I took it and opened it. Inside were the familiar strokes of my father's handwriting. Shaky but still clear. My dearest Harper. If you're reading this, then Daniel has kept his promise. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when I should have. But you've always been the one I'm most proud of. Live your own life, and teach Aidan that he was born out of love, not a mistake. Love. Dad. I looked up, tears streaming down my face. But this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were the tears of someone who had just recovered a piece of her soul that had been lost for years. Daniel now stood at the center of a ballroom gone utterly silent. He pulled a set of sealed documents from his briefcase, the red wax seal glinting under the lights. He raised them high before the entire crowd, his voice low but striking like a hammer. This is the final, legal, last will and testament of Mr. Henry Blake, notarized at the offices of Rowe and Associates on June 2, 3 years ago. And as of this moment, it will be read publicly, for all to hear. I held Aidan's hand tighter. Loretta had retreated into the shadows, her face sheet white, while Charlotte stood as if petrified. Daniel opened the document and began to read slowly. I, Henry Blake, being of sound mind and full awareness, hereby declare this as my final will and testament, to distribute my assets fairly, truthfully, and for the true future of the Blake legacy. I hereby leave 85% of my total estate, including full ownership of Blake properties, all real estate holdings, bank accounts and investment portfolios, to my daughter Harper Blake and my grandson Aidan Blake. The entire ballroom filled with murmurs, which fell silent as Daniel continued. The remaining 15% shall be allocated as an annual living allowance for my wife Loretta Blake, on the condition that she does not interfere with any business operations of the company. I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Loretta must have stood up. Charlotte swayed, her lips frozen, eyes unblinking. Daniel paused, set down the papers and pulled out a larger envelope from his coat pocket. And now, this is the part I believe both Miss Charlotte and Mrs. Loretta should pay close attention to. The documented evidence of unauthorized asset transfers and misuse of company property over the past 3 years. He opened the folder. The projector lit up behind him, displaying a detailed breakdown of bank transactions, account numbers, timestamps, recipients, each linked to shell corporations tied to Charlotte and Loretta. Daniel glanced around the now silent crowd and enunciated every word. Over the past 3 years, more than $3,800,000 was illegally transferred from Blake Properties' internal accounts into private funds, including the Blake Future Legacy Trust under Charlotte's name, and 2 accounts in the Cayman Islands controlled by Loretta. Loretta hissed. That's family money. Henry had no right to cut me out of the estate like this. Daniel turned to face her calmly. Mrs. Loretta, you are entitled to retain 15% of the estate as specified by Mr. Henry. However, the amount you embezzled exceeds your inheritance by more than double. Legally, this constitutes misappropriation of assets and abuse of authority within a private organization. Charlotte, looking unhinged, rushed to the microphone and yanked it from Daniel's hand. You people are making this up. It's all fake. This is just his revenge, and that crazy woman's, my sister. I stepped forward, my voice no longer trembling. Yes, I'm the crazy one. The crazy one who's been labeled the shame of the family for the last 10 years. But it was my father, the man you tried to erase from his own legacy, who was the only one left with a conscience in this rotten family. I turned to Daniel and gave him a nod. He pulled out one final document. This is Mr. Henry's internal memo, stored and sealed in my law office. In it, he wrote, I'm withholding the reading of my will to observe Loretta and Charlotte's behavior over the next 3 years. If they continue to manipulate and hurt Harper, I want my daughter to have clear, solid proof, not just of my decision, but of justice. I could barely breathe. Aidan clung to me, whispering, Grandpa was amazing, Mom. I swallowed my tears and nodded. Daniel turned back to the audience. All evidence has been submitted to the federal court, the IRS, and the Blake Properties Board of Directors. Tomorrow, Harper Blake will officially assume full executive control of the company. Charlotte screamed. You can't do this. I built the client network. I'm the face of the brand. Daniel shrugged. But you don't own it. And starting today, you are suspended from all representation roles and will be held financially accountable. If you object, the court will respond with the law. Loretta was speechless. She collapsed back into her chair, her hands trembling. I walked onto the stage, stood beside Daniel and looked out across the room. where a few of my father's old friends smiled at me with genuine respect. I didn't use any flowery words, I just spoke the truth. I didn't come back for revenge, I came to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And I'll use it to create something better, not another place of deception that excludes the vulnerable. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising like a wave. For the first time in years, I stood at the center, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the sole heir of Henry Blake. 3 weeks after that night that felt like hell, I stood on the 27th floor of Blake Properties, overlooking the tightly packed skyline of downtown Boston. Where I once felt like an outsider, now standing as the person in charge. The nameplate on the office door had been changed. CEO, Harper Blake. The door opened, Daniel walked in with the legal secretary and placed a thick file in front of me. This is the final transfer package. All assets, shares, and executive authority have been legally processed. From this point forward, Harper, it's your game. I nodded, my hands still trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of a power I never dared to imagine holding. A part of me wanted to run from that glass-walled room. But the part of me that had been crushed for a decade was burning bright. Thank you, Daniel. But I didn't come here to play games. I came to do what my father believed in. He smiled and left me alone in the room. I turned and looked up at the large portrait of Henry Blake hanging on the wall. His eyes were still sharp, but soft. Just like the last time, I heard him say my name without a trace of shame. Contrary to early rumors, the transition of power wasn't chaotic like many expected, because I didn't overthrow anything. I inherited. And I came with a clear vision, backed by a legal team led by Daniel. I called for a full company meeting. The boardroom was packed. No one knew what to expect. Many had only heard of me through HR reports or gossip, the daughter who ran off and had a child out of wedlock. But now they had to listen. I didn't bring speeches, I brought truth. My father, Henry Blake, built Blake Properties on the belief that wealth is not for show, it's a tool to create value for others. I paused, meeting every eye in the room. There was doubt, surprise, even suspicion. But over the past decade, this company has been distorted. Investments into phantom projects, lavish PR for an unqualified heir, contracts handed to friends. That's not the legacy he left. I clicked to the next slide. My new initiative. Blake Community Vision 20242-030. We're changing how we operate. From now on, 15% of the company's annual profits will go toward funding affordable housing for single mothers, veterans, and re-entry citizens. The room was silent. At the same time, I'm launching the Henry Blake Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting education, healthcare, and small business startups for the disadvantaged. And the first full-ride scholarship recipient will be Aidan Blake. Scattered applause turned into strong, steady clapping. Not for power, but for a vision worth believing in. Meanwhile, Loretta and Charlotte were left with nothing but an inventory of seized assets. Bank accounts frozen. The Beacon Hill home repossessed. Cars, jewelry, designer bags, all auctioned to repay the embezzled funds. Charlotte was erased from elite social circles, her sponsorships cancelled, old friends vanished without a trace. Last I heard, she was renting a small apartment in South Boston, working as an assistant at a mid-tier real estate firm. One she once sneered at. As for Loretta, she once stood in cocktail parties, flashbulbs lighting up her face. Now, she lives in a small, one-story home on the outskirts of Worcester, receiving a temporary stipend from the 15% share reserved for her in the will. I don't hate them anymore. I just don't care. 1 month later, I was interviewed by Boston Business Weekly. So how do you feel about being called the city's first humanitarian CEO? I just smiled. I don't want to be a humanitarian CEO. I just want to be someone who can sleep well at night, knowing my father would be proud. On an early spring morning, I took Aidan to visit our first housing project in Roxbury. the same area where I once lived in a cramped rental apartment. His face lit up when he saw the project name engraved at the entry sign. Lake Haven. A home built from kindness. Mom, can I work here one day? I pulled him into a hug. You won't just work here, Aiden. One day, you'll lead this place, if you choose to. But remember, not for power, but because you have the heart to do what's right. He nodded, eyes shining under the morning sun. It was then I realized. Justice isn't always about making the wicked kneel. Sometimes, justice is simply returning good people to the place they always deserved. Exactly 1 year after that wedding, the day every mask was torn off, I received an unexpected call from the front desk. Ms. Harper, there are 2 visitors waiting in the lobby. They say, they're your mother and sister. I looked out the glass window. Boston rain tapped softly on the 27th floor pane, like it was knocking on memories I'd shoved deep into a drawer. But that voice from a year ago still echoed in my head. Not worth a cent. I didn't say anything, just nodded and told the receptionist to send them up. Moments later the door opened. Loretta and Charlotte stepped in. No silk dresses, no Prada bags. My mother wore a simple sweater and a faded gray skirt. Charlotte looked thinner, her skin pale from either stress or life, I couldn't tell. Harper, Loretta said softly. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard. I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I didn't invite them to sit. They didn't dare assume they could. Charlotte stood beside her, eyes lowered. For the first time in years, she didn't walk like a model on a catwalk. We came to apologize, she said, her voice raspy like it had been forced through her throat. What happened before, I can't undo. But I want to take responsibility. Even just a little. I folded my arms and leaned back against the desk, studying them. No anger. No sarcasm. Just silence heavy enough to crush the room. How've you lived this past year? I asked plainly. Loretta glanced nervously at her daughter. Charlotte bit her lip. I'm working as a sales assistant at a small real estate firm, mostly entering data and calling clients. The pay covers the basics. And Mom lives with me. I nodded slowly. Everyone pays for their choices. But I wasn't a judge with a gavel. I was a mother. And my father, the man who had placed his final trust in me, had once been a husband, a father to the 2 people now standing before me. I'm not bringing the past back in, I began. It's too filthy to take home. But I have one condition. They looked up, confused. I'll provide Mom a fixed monthly allowance just as stated in Dad's will. And Charlotte, I'll give you a legitimate position in one of the non-profit arms of the company, if you truly want to make things right. They both looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. But, I cut in, I'm not giving this for free. In return, once a month you both must come visit Aiden. Not to redeem yourselves, but so he can understand that family is something we can rebuild. If we choose humility. Loretta broke down in tears, tears falling on cheeks that had once been too cold to offer even a glance of compassion. Thank you. For not becoming the kind of mother I once was. I said nothing. I simply opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. The 3 of us, Charlotte, Dad, and me, from a picnic when I was 16. Dad's smile beamed, arms wide, like he was trying to embrace both his daughters. I set the photo on the table. For him. And for Aiden. Charlotte stepped forward, hesitantly placing her hand on my shoulder. For the first time in my life, I felt her hand tremble. She wasn't the proud younger sister anymore, not the bride in a designer gown mocking her own sibling. Now she was just a broken woman, trying to find her way back. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I just want to learn how to love. The way you loved Aiden. And yourself. I didn't say anything. I opened the door and gestured for them to leave, then quietly added, See ya, first week of next month. Aiden will be waiting. A few weeks later, on a quiet late autumn afternoon, with sunlight just golden enough to spill warmth on the doorstep, Loretta and Charlotte came to my home. Aiden opened the door. Grandma? Aunt Charlotte? He was surprised, but he didn't step back. He simply looked at me, seeking confirmation. I gave him a small nod. He smiled and tugged them inside. In the little kitchen, I brewed tea. They sat at the dining table where I used to cry alone every night, and now, soft laughter fluttered in the air. Not loud, not complete, but enough to begin again. I stood in the doorway, tea in hand, gazing at the photo of Dad hanging above the fireplace. Dad. I did it. But not to defeat anyone. Only to preserve what you always believed. A family doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest and brave enough to heal. It was the second spring since everything changed, and Boston felt like it had finally awakened from a long slumber. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the banks of the Charles River, bicycles trailed through the public garden, and Aiden, the once timid boy who used to hide behind me in crowds, was now walking hand in hand with Daniel onto the stage at the Youth Leadership for Community Forum. I sat in the front row, heart steady. Not from nerves, but from emotion. Your son is wonderful, an older woman beside me whispered. I smiled, watching Aiden stand tall, delivering a short speech with clarity and confidence. My name is Aiden Blake. My grandpa taught me that kindness isn't a weakness, it's what makes people trustworthy. I want to grow up and build houses for people who don't have a place to go, like my mom is doing, like my grandpa used to do. The room erupted in applause. But I simply wiped away a quiet tear. That boy who was 8 is now 9, and more grown up than many adults who've crossed my life. Daniel and I never had a define the relationship talk. We didn't need one. After the last time he rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to prove anything anymore, just live the life you want." Everything between us shifted. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't push me to open up. He was just there. Like a good man always chooses to be, when things aren't easy. Every weekend he took Aiden to museums, fishing at Walden Pond, or spent hours building model airplanes. Aiden calls him Uncle Dan, with the kind of respect that speaks louder than titles. As for me, I got used to someone bringing me coffee each morning at the office. Someone who knew I liked cinnamon, no cream. The only person who dared look me in the eye and say, "Harper, you're tired, shut it down, go home." I kept my promise to Dad. Blake Properties is no longer tied to meaningless luxury developments. We've built 3 new affordable housing communities, in Dorchester, East Boston, and a section of Worcester. Each one includes a library, playground, legal aid center, and parenting skill workshops for single parents. I didn't use my name to paint ideals. I used results. And what I'm most proud of is this. When people mention the name Harper Blake, they no longer say, "the daughter who was disowned and fought back." They say, "the CEO who turned a real estate company into a foundation for hope." As for Loretta and Charlotte, things aren't perfect. But they're honest. Charlotte has gradually found stability working at the Blake Foundation. She's not a manager, doesn't appear in press releases. She chose to stay behind the scenes. And I let her. No praise, no criticism. Loretta still lives in Worcester. She visits Aiden once a month. She's never late. She never asks for anything. She never says "I'm sorry" again. But the way she looks at my son tells me enough. She's trying, in her own way. Once, as I was helping Aiden into the car, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "If you can forgive, then your father can. Rest easy." I didn't answer. But I didn't pull my hand away. That summer, I hosted a small backyard gathering at our new home in Newton. Not to show off. Just a moment to let the people who stood by me during the storm sit together under warm lights, with grilled food, buttery pastries, and genuine laughter. Aiden ran around with his new friends. Daniel was out back making French mild cold brew. Charlotte helped set the table. Loretta sat under the awning, reading to a little girl. The daughter of an employee once helped by one of our housing projects. I stood in the middle of the yard, wine glass in hand, looking at all those people. A year ago, I didn't believe in family anymore. Today, I don't just believe. I live it, flawed, scarred but real. And I understand now. Family isn't made of people who are always right. Family is made of those who are willing to face their wrongs, willing to stay, and brave enough to begin again. With a listening heart, I looked up at the summer sky, clear and blue, as if all the old pain had finally lifted. Dad, if you're watching from somewhere, I just want to say, I'm okay now, Aiden's okay, and what you believed in is growing, little by little, from gratitude. Harper's story isn't just a fight for justice. It's a powerful testament to resilience, motherhood, and the healing that truth can bring. From a single mother cast out by her family, she rose, reclaimed her dignity, protected her son, and built a life grounded in lasting values. Most of all, she learned to forgive, not to forget the past, but to clear the way for a better future, for herself and those around her. What do you think about Harper's journey and the way she chose to confront her past? Would you have forgiven like she did? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, healing, and hope.